Have you guys seen that vegan guy melting down on Blue Sky? He's telling Chinese people they don't know how to cook tofu.
That's my second run-in with that guy. I first met him maybe 4 or 5 months ago. I think literally he searches. He's got like a feed or something set up that just shoots everything that includes the word vegan to him. At which point he jumps in the replies and has the persistence of a Will Stancil or a rhinoceros.
He keeps bringing up the civil rights movement and specifically name checking MLK, and all of us are just like, could you please stop comparing black people to chickens? Like,
let's not do that. Also, Will Stancil, but for veganism, is the most cursed idea I think I've ever.
Yes.
Look, I have nothing against vegans or veganism as a general concept. I try and eat less meat myself pretty regularly. You know, even just switching from beef to chicken, there's a bunch of good reasons to do this. But like,
I want our lab grown meat.
That was the prompt you jumped in on, right? That apparently the FDA just approved lab grown salmon, which I guess is exciting. I don't know.
I mean, I'll try it.
I feel less strongly ethically about salmon than I do about, eating mammals.
Salmon farming is really, really rough. It's really, really rough on the environment around it. It's really, I mean, the term inhumane, I think at a certain point when you get out of the mammal family, it sort of loses some relevance, but it is a pretty rough practice from an environmental perspective. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I will absolutely live in the pod. I will absolutely eat the lab-grown salmon. I mean, come on, especially if it tastes as good as the real thing, which, I mean, I don't know.
He was also yelling at Sharon about not knowing anything about vegan food, even though Sharon is from South India,
right?
Where like almost every meal is vegan.
Love that for this poster in question.
I mean, like I think the vegans probably ultimately have the right of it ethically, but they are the worst advocates. Some of them are the worst advocates for their position.
This specific guy is the worst.
This specific guy is
yes.
He's out there. He's out there just undermining his cause at every step.
The other thing is, I'm pretty sure he's British.
Oh,
because
Lord.
if you look at his, which makes bringing up like MLK and Harvey Milk all the more obnoxious, because he's got in his Blue Sky profile, he mentions the number of times people have told him to kill himself for advocating veganism at 26. And then it says last updated 10/6/25. And so if you're going to, you have that, right. And then you start talking about MLK. I'm the guy in Inglourious Bastards holding the three fingers up.
Right. You got the Euro date format. Maybe find your own civil rights leaders. I guess.
Yeah. Go talk about some lord from the 14th century or some shit.
Yeah, the picture of his barbecue sauce tofu definitely looked plausibly British. So
misshapen protein covered in vague sauce. Yeah, that's about bread.
I said in response, I can't remember who posted it. I think it was Leonid, but I was like, this looks like somebody made a Jell-O with carrots in it and then somehow burned it. Which is not a possible thing to do.
Have you seen those TikToks or Instagram reels of the Latina ladies that are making these Jell-O cakes? They're like a sheet Jell-O where they build it up, and when they pull it out of the pan, it's this incredible three-dimensional design. Whatever the opposite of that is what this guy was eating.
The opposite of that, just throwing a big old hunk of tofu in a casserole dish and covering it with barbecue sauce.
And broiling it to all hell and back?
Yes.
Welcome to Normal Men, a podcast from four men who are clinging desperately to normalcy in an era when normalcy is impossible to find. We talk about what's happening, explain some of it, and joke with each other in order to stay sane. I'm George in Charlotte.
I'm Proctor Malone from the District of Columbia.
I'm low-tax speedrun enjoyer in outer Florida.
I'm Go Like Hell Machine in Antifa-controlled Portland.
Just before we get going this week, we have a brief housekeeping note. Go Like Hell Machine is taking a quick hiatus from the podcast. We hope it'll be quick, and he hopes it'll be quick. We don't know how long it'll be. He will be back at some point. At least that's what he has said to us, and that's what we are hoping from him. So if you're missing your Go Like Hell Machine fix, you can check out golikehellmachine.bsky.social. And in the meantime, we will be here podcasting every week as normal and hoping he is back as soon as possible. And just so everyone's not worried, everything's okay. He just has lost the capacity to join us every week.
And because we believe firmly in transparency here on the Normal Men podcast, we just want you to know that Hell Machine, we discovered that he was a member of a post-punk band, which is not a healthy thing. And so we're yes, his post-punk band, the Tragic Lovers. We were not aware of this when we brought him into the show, and we apologize for not doing our due diligence on that. But we just wanted to give y'all a heads up. We're getting him the help he needs, though.
We're listening, we're learning, and we hope he does too. On to more serious matters, there is now a hot war between Iran and Israel. It hasn't been much of a showing on the Iran side, but it is a war nonetheless. So, Proctor, where are we at with the current conflict between Israel and Iran?
So we're recording this on Monday night, the 16th. Things kicked off last Thursday when Israel hit Iran with a barrage of attacks from a bunch of different directions. We had missile strikes, bombings. It seems like there was some amount of covert activity on the ground where Israel was attempting to kill specific personnel within the Iranian regime. Whether that's military leaders or scientists emeritus. There were targeted assassination strikes that did a fair amount of collateral damage as well. The death counts we've gotten so far, I think we're at a little bit north of 200 in Iran as of this podcast, according to Iran. And we've had direct attacks on nuclear facilities. It sounds like Israel had compromised Iranian operations to the extent that when Iran huddled up a bunch of their guys in a bunker to try to protect them from Israeli strikes, they were able to strike that bunker. So this is Israel immediately going for a lot of damage to the organizational structure. And I think that owes a lot to the relative success of their previous strategy against Hezbollah, where they were able to take out the command structure and essentially get Hezbollah to back off on that basis.
Both the attacks on Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran have shared in common an effort to use a metaphor, cut the head off the snake, and they've been extraordinarily successful. You could not find somebody, a military analyst, that would say, oh yeah, Israel would be able to establish complete air superiority over Iran in a matter of roughly 3 hours. And that appears to be what they did. They, from the drop, appear to have had complete air superiority. And that really changes the tenor of the idea of a war between Israel and Iran in the Middle East in terms of the downsides. And it does that because Israel can sit back and take shots at, for instance, military leadership, military capacity, nuclear program, without actually landing troops or without actually risking that Hormuz gets closed because of collateral damage or assaults on Iran's oil production capacity. And so it's a completely different conflict from, I think, what you would have expected a week ago if you had been told Israel and Iran are about to be in a hot war.
Yeah, I'm by no stretch of the imagination a war knower, but from what I understand, if you've established a monopoly through the air, there's not really much to talk about.
I mean, we are in a situation where Iran is still launching counterstrikes on Israel. It's a little unclear whether Iran is trying to stick primarily to military targets and missing, or if they're trying to hit targets that are not as important militarily, but that are less well defended. They are getting some ordnance through. There's been a couple of dozen deaths, at least in Israel. Israel is playing it fairly close to the chest about how much damage there is. One of the concerns on the Israeli side is that the Jewish parts of Israel are fairly well fortified in terms of shelters that are accessible to the public, whereas Arab Israeli communities tend to not have the same shelter density. So despite the
Why is that? Why is that? I don't. Why wouldn't they have those shelters in the Arab parts of Israel?
well, I mean, you got the good version of this and the bad version of this, right? Like you put the shelters where the rockets are being shot at, which is the Jews. But when you have a situation like this where you have ordnance coming in from a very long distance, what it means is that a significant fraction of the casualties so far have been Arab Israelis from Iranian missiles. And, Israel is definitely taking some hits here. This is not costless for Israel, either in terms of blood or in terms of treasure. They, and also we, the United States, are blowing a lot of value in terms of interceptors to try to take down Iranian missiles. It did seem like the initial counterattack was delayed as a result of these decapitation strikes. And it's not clear that the overall counterattack is going to crescendo all that much from here. Israel's story on this whole...
Just on that, the interceptor issue is interesting for a couple different reasons. First, the US and the UK are both participating in that. The US has been intercepting drones and missiles as they fly west out of Iran. Israel also has the densest air defense network in the world over, whether Iron Dome or David Sling or whatever system you're talking about. So there's that. But also there's been some pretty good analysis done suggesting that Israel did a really good job on the ground inside Iran with the same sorts of technologies we talked about on our last episode with Fain, where they were ready to attack ballistic launchers when they were rolled out to be used in the response. And they used drones to do this in some instances. So, but again, I've seen estimates of 200 plus different actions inside Iran by Mossad that look like this, where it's either an anti-air installation or a ballistic launcher or whatever struck by a drone attack or some other sort of covert attack. They're able to do this because Mossad is very well organized. And in that episode, we had talked about the pager attack that they used against Hezbollah. Same concept, right? Like these guys know what they're doing for these kinds of operations in a way that is not going to be replicable inside the continental United States, for instance, by some sort of terrorist or something like that.
Yeah, I would amplify that by saying that this is very much the purpose that Mossad has been driving towards for many years now. That Mossad as an organization is built to fight Iran. They're built to compromise Iranian operations, to get inside of Iranian institutions. And these intel services do a much better job when they're fighting the war they're intended to fight than when they're playing out of position. We saw that with U.S. intel during the global war on terror versus U.S. intel getting back to our happy place of compromising Russians. We saw that with Mossad, which did, frankly, I think a pretty poor job in Gaza, which they viewed for a long time as being kind of not their purview, but which has done much better against Hezbollah and against Iran. I think that the Israeli motivations are worth talking about a little bit here because we have an ostensible story that's coming out of Israel and then maybe some motivations that are actually what's going on. Israel's official story is that this is about nukes, that it's necessary for them to strike to prevent Iran from achieving a nuclear weapon, which Israel, with some justification, views as an existential threat to Israel. Israel's not a big country. You drop a nuke on Tel Aviv, there's not a whole lot left. Israel has, for a very long time, made it a priority, made it an absolute bright line that Iran cannot have nukes, and Israel is willing to do whatever it takes within its power to prevent Iran from having nukes. That said, the background of this is that Trump, during his first presidency, pulled the United States out of a multilateral arrangement where we got to go inspect Iran's nuclear development, and they got to do some amount of nuclear development, but we got to keep very good tabs on it. They axed the JCPOA, and that was very much at Israel's behest. And we're kind of reaping some of the fruits of that now, that the diplomacy that would keep nukes out of Iran's capabilities at this point has already failed. And now we have this situation where these strikes happened right ahead of scheduled additional U.S. talks with Iran that might have resulted in essentially going back to something like the JCPOA framework, where we have inspections and where we keep them off nukes that way. But instead, we've got a hot war.
Do we think Trump signed off on all this?
Absolutely not. 0% chance.
I don't think so either. I think this is Bibi pushing his hand.
It absolutely was Bibi calling Trump's bluff, and now everything Trump has said since last Thursday night has been him trying to spin it as like, I'm the one in control and we're doing this the way I wanted to, when no, sir, very much the opposite.
Yeah.
Yeah, Trump's initial spin was that the United States had nothing to do with this. Don't strike American bases, and we won't get involved. But as soon as it became clear that at least the first round of decapitation strikes was very successful, you saw kind of a tone switch from the United States. That our big wet president loves a winner. So we're diving in on this now that it looks like things are going great.
Yeah, it was fun with all the Europeans initially were like, we didn't have anything to do with this. Don't look at us. Nothing. And then Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, came out and basically said the same thing.
Like hours out, within an hour of the strikes happening too. It was clearly planned. It was clearly like, oh yeah, don't hit our bases in the Persian Gulf. Like, no, don't do that.
Right.
Yeah.
No. This is all on Bibi. And then Trump sees that it's going well, and it's going surprisingly well. Like, this was,
from the Israeli perspective, I don't think you could ask for it to have gone better. I don't know what you would want to happen that hasn't gone better than it has. From the Bibi Israel perspective, I don't know what's best for the nation of Israel, but from his narrow perspective, for sure.
Yeah. The intelligence operation here was stunning.
I think we really have to separate the tactical successes from the strategic goals here.
That's a fair point.
Because tactically, this is going great for Israel. This is the plan they were trying to execute. They've killed a bunch of important leaders, hampered the response. They've blown up a significant number of missile launchers, which is a big deal because Iran's strategy to get through Israel's missile defenses is to saturate them. They need to be able to shoot a bunch of ordnance at the same time to be able to get anything through. So if you take launchers off the table, that reduces the missile density that Iran is capable of launching in a single volley. So tactically, that's going great. Strategically, it seems pretty clear from what Bibi is saying that the goal here is regime change in Iran. That's hard to do with missiles, and it's unpredictable if and when it happens. One very real concern is that this successfully topples the theocracy in Iran, which is great. The theocracy in Iran is not good guys. Don't mistake anything I say on this podcast, at least for being cheerleaders for the Iranian for the current Iranian regime. But it's entirely possible that a successor regime might be less Islamic, but even more security oriented, since the existential threat here is warfare from Israel and the United States.
Yeah, I think there is a tail risk the other way too. It's worth saying that there is a complete rethink from the Iranian populace about what their government should be doing with respect to the rest of the world. I would not want to bet either way on that outcome, and I certainly wouldn't want to do it any care for the lives of the people on the ground in Iran who are facing not only an enemy that has air superiority, but also now may have to deal with an internal conflict as well. If the regime does fall, there will be an internal conflict of some kind. These sorts of things have massive collateral damage. So this is not a good outcome in the sense of the broader world, and the risks are enormous. I mean, just the fact that there's a pretty healthy amount of enriched uranium floating around Iran, and a dirty bomb is much easier to make than a up and up fission bomb. That's not wonderful. That's really actually quite bad. So yeah, I mean, it's sort of in miniature a repeat of what we saw between the United States and the Soviet Union in the 1990s, playing out at very high speed, I think. And in some cases, for some countries, that worked out pretty well. Like if you're in the Baltic states right now, you're probably pretty happy with how that all played out. If you're in Ukraine, a little less so, right? So yeah, history is continuing to happen.
And if you're in Libya, you've entered actual hell.
The outlook from here is getting a lot more murky, and it's in part because there was such a complete failure of Iran's ability to defend itself that no one saw coming, right? And how that plays out in the domestic politics and in the political infrastructure of the Iranian regime is, I hope the boys at Langley know what they're doing, because I have no idea how you forecast that or try and understand that. And like I said, I do think there are benign outcomes, but it's a really big risk to be playing with.
My knowledge of Iran is more that they've never been a great conventional military power. Rather, Iran historically has excelled in, the Quds Force, the Revolutionary Guard, and their military and intelligence paired kind of work. They ran circles around us in Beirut back in the 80s during the Civil War and stuff when Khomeini was running the show. So I guess I'm not surprised that in a conventional fight that Israel is capable of beating them pretty soundly, at least as far as air war and missiles go. I am again really surprised at the intelligence game here, because that historically has been a strength of Iran's.
Yeah, this is something that I've been talking about on Blue Sky, but one major worry I have for America from here is that we've seen now in the space of several weeks, several major powers get pantsed by hostile intelligence. And this is happening against the backdrop of us handing our intel services over to Tulsi Gabbard and Pete Hegseth. We do not have our best and brightest running American intelligence right now.
No.
At some point, we're going to be very vulnerable. This kind of caper to this kind of attack, if somebody chooses to prosecute it, whether that's China, whether that's Russia. I guess Russia's already been pretty successful in terms of intel ops here.
I feel pretty good about us on Russia. We cannot predict like a trade agreement in a Middle Eastern country that's been telegraphed for 3 years out. But by God, we can spy on some Russians.
We can spy on them, but it's no longer clear that we can do counter intel. And that's kind of a different game in some ways. Like I have no doubt that we've done a good and aggressive job of flipping people inside of various Russia organizations. And probably some of those people are still alive. But I am increasingly worried that we also have significant compromise within the United States by foreign intelligence. And like we laugh it off with stuff like, the waiter at Mar-a-Lago is probably working for 3 different powers right now. That's all true, but that's not the limit of it. That one thing that this set of attacks and the Russian attacks drives home is that you can do a lot of physical damage with the intelligence war if you're so inclined, particularly in this modern age, and you can do it without significant boots on the ground.
I think the one thing I think to put a slightly more optimistic spin on it before we close out this particularly grim discussion is that the big intelligence failures that we've seen from countries like Iran or Russia in terms of the big penetrating attacks have come from countries that they're already in a hot conflict with, and countries that have significant geographic reach, nearby geographic reach to them, right? There is not a good example of that for the United States. Historically, it has been very hard to get into a war with the United States because getting to the United States is a major pain. I mean, that alone is like a huge part of American history that I think isn't really fully appreciated. Our geography is a big story in our history. So, yeah, I mean, I think I share Proctor's concerns here with regards to counterintelligence and with regards to the people running the show. But you also need an adversary that actually wants to do hot military stuff against us. And the number of countries I think that are interested in that is actually declining, not going up. And part of that is because of the success Israel has had. China is constantly pitched as this great adversary for us. The idea that Xi Jinping wants to get into a shooting war with the United States for any reason at any point in the forecastable horizon, a decade plus, is not a thing. I mean, that's just not how he thinks. Way too risk averse, way too appreciative of history, and way too appreciative of the limitations that they have in terms of projecting power. And for a terrorist strike of some kind, some sort of asymmetric non-state thing, I think, yeah, this is a problem for us. The fact that we have a guy who bathes himself in gin running the Department of Defense and a full-blown foreign asset running D&I. That is a huge problem because they're incompetent and because they don't have national interests in mind. But from a great power or a power conflict perspective, a nation state war perspective, I'm less worried because I think there are more efficient ways to get what people want. Why not just bribe the president? He's very clearly put up the for sale sign. So why not do that? That's going to be cheaper and lower risk. We'll see if that prediction on my part rings true, but maybe a little bit more optimism around the risks that we're dealing with here.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with George in that there are easier, cheaper ways to get what you want out of the United States right now, because you can bribe people on a scale that is not a nation state scale. This is, I guess, maybe more of a medium to long term concern of mine. And of course, if we were to get into a hot war with somebody else, that would make it a shorter term concern. Anyway, that's, I guess, enough doom on that front for right now. Although, speaking of hot wars, we are diverting now significant assets towards CENTCOM. So we are dealing ourselves in on the Israel-Iran conflict in terms of sending in additional planes, an additional carrier group. We'll see whether or not we get involved in the hot war other than just, plane interceptor for strikes against Israel. But there are some tail risks here that, interestingly to me, the market hasn't, I think, really priced in. Is that fair to say, George, that there hasn't been a whole lot of market movement on this?
Well, oil was up huge. And the reason for that is the Strait of Hormuz, which is the strait between Oman and Iran. About 20% of global liquid petroleum supply goes through that strait. If either through just the risk of a nearby conflict or an outright interdiction of freighter traffic through that strait, you close it, that means you got to go find a whole bunch of oil somewhere else. And there's only so much in inventory, and oil is highly, highly elastic or inelastic, So demand doesn't fall that much. Price just flies, and you're in a very bad situation there. Oil was down pretty heavily today. And the reason is the market is seeing how effective Israel is being and how closely they're trying to avoid Iranian oil facilities in terms of the export capacity and production capacity. They've hit some gas stuff that's domestic gas infrastructure and natural gas infrastructure, but they haven't gone after export facilities or oil field production. And the thinking from the market is that Iran will not close the Strait of Hormuz and may not even have the ability to do so given the Israeli air presence without something big changing, because Israel's target selection has made it much harder for them to do that and come out looking like anything but the bad guy. There is absolutely a risk that Iran says, okay, we're going down with the ship, and instructs the IRGC to just do anything they can to keep any shipping happening in the Strait of Hormuz. That eventuality is why we have now a second carrier battle group headed west out of the Western Pacific, why we sent 30 plus tankers to Europe to be staged closer to the theater, because if the Strait of Hormuz closes, the US will get involved. Not with marine battalions on the shores of Iran, but by basically making it impossible for Iran to project power into the Strait of Hormuz and threaten global oil flows. And I think that's a defensible thing for American foreign policy to do. If Iran essentially, in the process of defending itself against Israel, says, well, we're going to prevent third country ships from moving through our coastal waters, ships from Saudi Arabia that have nothing to do with Israel, then I think it's defensible for another power to get involved and say, no, we're not doing this. And that also does not necessarily mean an escalation into a broader global conflagration, because that oil is all headed to China. That's who's buying that oil that goes through the Strait of Hormuz. I think the market's reasoning, and I would say mine as well, is that Israel has been so dominant in the air that it's really changed the tail risks, because Iran can't do the things that you would worry about them doing that would have a huge impact on the global economy via the oil markets.
So we're kind of in wait and see mode until things shift further from a financial market perspective.
Yeah. If the regime collapses in Iran, then you open up a whole bunch of tail risks, like the dirty bomb thing I was referring to earlier. But that's a fundamentally different risk set than a intact Iranian regime trying to hit anything that sails by that looks like it might have oil on it, or launch truly massive waves of missiles and drones that saturate Israeli defenses, or drags in other countries, like maybe, for instance, Russia. I don't know. But if the Iranian state collapses and is incapable of defending its own airspace, I think it just narrows the range of outcomes that can flood out onto the world stage quite dramatically.
Well, and it seems to me also that Russia is a beneficiary of the United States getting involved with Iran, because they're the other people who are selling oil to China. So any price action there is Russia's gain. Russia desperately needs money, and the way they get it is by selling oil. So positive price pressure on oil is good for Russia. China's kind of got the opposite side of that on the oil thing, but from a geopolitical conflict thing, they're pretty much fine with us bogging down in Iran too.
Yeah, I don't think China's going to. Yeah,
I mean, Iran is enormous. One of the reasons why sending in the Marines is not at all a palatable option is that we're talking about it's
4
the size
times
of California plus.
I think it's like 3 times the size of Texas. It's, to put it in perspective, Iran is 4 times the size in population of Iraq, and we all know how well that war went, famously.
I just don't see a scenario where the U.S. puts troops on the ground in Iran. And I think the reaction that Trump had to Netanyahu kicking all of this off is all you need to know. It was very clear from the reporting that he was not interested in being the president overseeing a hot war between Israel and Iran. And now that it looks like the risk has come down in terms of how bad things could get, he's happy to jump in and say this, we're going to, talk tough, whatever. But he's not going to send the Marines over there. What would be the point? I mean, Israel is already accomplishing all of its strategic goals, tactical goals in this campaign. And on the strategy side, Trump is bad for a bunch of reasons, but the guy does not want American caskets covered in flags coming home. It's like it's like that, loves tariffs, pretty racist. Like there's a few through lines for this guy all the way through, and that's one of them. So I just don't see how you get there.
Yeah, the Iraq War is one that he really dialed in on. And I remember back in the 2016 campaign when we were all talking about Syria, and McCain and Graham, and to a lesser extent Hillary Clinton, were all talking about, we have to arm the moderates, or we should send in special forces, or whatever the case. And Trump responded to all that by saying, who are these moderates? We don't know who these people are. Some of these people are not moderate at all. This would be this is not something we should do. One of the few moments where I was like, okay, that's a very fair point. But he's afraid of committing large scale deployments of troops. He doesn't want anything to do with it.
So one of the long-term concerns in Iran is going to be civil unrest within Iran, but we have plenty of civil unrest happening domestically as well. We've got civil unrest at home. So we wanted to move over to talk about what's happening ICE in Los Angeles and also nationwide. Rather than walk through kind of a point by point of things that have happened, we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about Senator Padilla being manhandled. Not going to spend a lot of time talking about most of the operational details here. But from the federal state perspective, one thing that is happening is that the Trump administration is federalizing the National Guard and also trying to send in Marines to control what is essentially a nothing burger of unrest in Los Angeles. These have been overwhelmingly peaceful protests. What violence there has largely been coming from LAPD and LASD doing exactly what you would expect LAPD and LASD to do in terms of riot control.
And to each other in some cases. There were some great reports this weekend of them opening up with rubber bullets and getting into each other's crossfire to the point where they were yelling at each other on the radio, like, stop shooting at us. And it was the other side. Yeah. Good, really great stuff, guys.
It's really great that we have cops who love to go out and play soldier, isn't it?
Love that for us.
You tell these guys they're shooting rubber bullets, and all of a sudden the mentality changes a little. At least I hope it changes a little, that they feel like they can get away with a lot more in terms of using the toys. We have seen some bad action out there. I don't want to totally disregard that. There have been reports of people chucking Molotov cocktails. That's bad, but it's a tiny, tiny, tiny minority of the protests that are violent from the protesters in Los Angeles. I think one thing that a lot of us have been, that I at least have been very concerned about, is what is going to be the posture of the United States Armed Forces if they're asked to do operations within the United States against the American populace. And so far, my sense is that the Marines are behaving themselves pretty well.
I mean, behaving themselves pretty well and really just staying out of the limelight, right? I mean, there was a minor drama on everyone's favorite non-Nazi posting website last night where people were saying, oh, look, a Marine helicopter and Marines are leading the spear into a Latino neighborhood in LA so ICE can do deportations. And like, no, they were all Homeland Security people that are just, our federal law enforcement looks like special forces now. They're not actually Marines. There was also an interesting thing where the Marines deployed to the Wilshire Federal Building, which is it's basically in Santa Monica, which is, if you've ever been to LA, I mean, people forget how enormous Los Angeles is. I was out there for a wedding a couple years ago, and we took a morning to drive from near where my mom lived in Topanga out to downtown and see some stuff and come back. And I mean, this looks on the map like a relatively easy drive, and it turned into a 5 or 6 hour sojourn. I mean, it's just an enormous place. So anyhow, the Marines deployed to out near Santa Monica on the west side, where there is a Wilshire Federal Building, as opposed to the Federal Building with the ICE stuff and all that stuff downtown, which almost certainly was malicious compliance. I mean, there is just no way even Marines, even jarheads are not that bad at wayfinding, right? Like there's just no chance. These guys do land navigation courses. I'm pretty sure someone knew what was going on there. Now, that specific thing is a small signal in the context of a lot of other horrifying stuff that's going on. But I think that Jamel Bouie's been really aggressive about talking about this, about how the military is composed and the sort of person that you're actually asking to do something terrible to an American civilian. And what a huge ask that is. I mean, what a really big ask that is for the individuals who you're actually asking to do it. Does that mean nothing bad can happen? No, of course not. But there is a lot of fear around this stuff and a lot of paranoia that is justified by the rhetoric used by the right. And I'm very sympathetic to people who are thinking that way. But if you look at what's actually happening on the ground, the Marine deployment to LA thus far has been show. Thus far. Maybe that'll change.
It was also delayed. There were reports early last week that, the administration said, send in the Marines. And the Marines said, well, hang on a second. We got to go do this additional training first. But we'll be there in a couple of days. Don't worry. So, somebody out of 29 Palms is, at least it seems to me, slow walking this in a way that is in the interests of the American people. That doesn't necessarily get up to the malicious compliance threshold, but somebody in the chain of command there is taking some amount of care to try to prevent the nightmare scenarios. This is way better.
And there was a detention of a civilian by National Guard personnel.
The guy they detained was a veteran who had an appointment in the Wilshire building, and he walked in through a taped off area, and the Marines went, "Hey, you can't do that, buddy," and they zip tied his wrists and handed him over to ICE. The guy in question said that the Marines were polite and professional, and he felt like he was fairly treated by them. So insofar as there's a silver lining to that cloud, like it's not great that they're grabbing people, but they're grabbing people on federal property, which is, as I'll get to in a minute, potentially a different legal issue than the kind of enforcement that Trump would like them to do. They're grabbing people who are coming in onto federal property, walking through areas that are visibly restricted.
So speaking of that legal distinction, there's a whole bunch of legal stuff going on right now about federalizing the National Guard's Marines. Proctor, tell us what's going on with the courts around this, because that's a developing thing.
Number one, we'll keep this simple with the National Guard. California got a very, very favorable ruling last week about Trump's ability to federalize the National Guard in California in response to this at the district court level from Justice Breyer's brother, actually, who sounds exactly like Justice Breyer did, for those of us who've been court watchers for a while. That ruling was immediately appealed and was put on an administrative stay by the Ninth Circuit. Admin stays have been maybe abused a little bit in recent years, but the minimal version of an administrative stay is just that the court is saying, hold on a second, we're going to leave this in place while we figure out the lay of the land. What we're expecting to happen, I believe they're hearing this tomorrow. They've already received briefs from California and from the federal government on whether or not this National Guard thing can continue. And I believe that they're doing oral arguments as soon as tomorrow. I would personally be surprised if we don't get a ruling on that fairly quickly. We'll see what happens. The Ninth Circuit is not the liberal bastion it used to be, but this is not, to my mind, a particularly close case. I think there is some justification for a little bit of foot dragging on the administrative stay, because you're talking about moving a lot of people around in response to a court ruling that may flip back and forth in a legal posture a few times. You're talking about, I think it's 2,000 deployed, but I think he wants to deploy up to 4,000 in LA. That's a lot of people to have going one place and going another. That's a significant operational burden for something that may change on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis as this gets tossed around from district court to the appellate panel to probably appellate en banc if it goes the wrong way, and then potentially to the Supremes. So I think there's some justification for leaving things in place on that basis. We'll see if they foot drag on the admin stay. Now, that decision did not reach the Marine deployment. It specifically did not reach the Marine deployment, and I would expect separate litigation regarding that. The way that United States military forces being deployed within the United States to do law enforcement is governed is by what's called the Posse Comitatus Act, which is actually an act that was pushed by Southern states during Reconstruction to keep the Army out of their business. So there's maybe a little historical irony there.
States' rights, brother.
Yeah, this is now on the side of the good guys, but it is the law of the land. There have been maybe not enough rulings on this in some ways, but the position of the federal government for a long time has been that military forces can do law enforcement-like activity on federal property. The rationale for this is pretty straightforward. That if you want to have, for instance, U.S. Army bases protected by U.S. Army soldiers, that's a law enforcement function. They're apprehending people on military bases. They're restricting areas like law enforcement does. They're enforcing laws like law enforcement does. So the argument is, well, of course we can do that. Fair enough. The way that the Trump administration would like to take this is to argue that protecting federal functions is within the proper purview of United States military on U.S. soil, even if it's not on federal property. So what they want to argue is that if there are proper federal functions like ICE going out and snatching people, that you can send in the Army to protect ICE. You can't send in the Army to actually do the snatching, but you can send in the Army to go sit there behind the guys who are doing the snatching with guns to help prevent other people from interfering with them.
So you're saying we can't give Lena Khan a Gundam, but we can give someone a Gundam to stand behind Lena Khan.
That is the argument. We'll see how that holds up. That's a novel argument. I don't think it's a very good one, but I'm not a federal judge, so we'll kind of see where they are if it comes to that.
When has a bad argument ever stopped them?
Well, I mean, kind of the status quo for a long time has been, despite the fact that, to the best of my knowledge, there's never been a federal court ruling that this interpretation is fine, and some of legal academia has argued that this is actually overreach, that Posse Comitatus prevents the deployment of Marines to do things like protect the Wilshire building. That has been the status quo for a long time. That's how it's been interpreted by this administration and by previous administrations. Thus far, it seems like the Marines are sticking to that interpretation rather than the interpretation that says they get to go ride shotgun with the body snatchers.
Trump would like to use the Marines as though he were a king. But fortunately, this weekend, we had some good old protests for No King's Day.
No King's Day, the protests, at least 3 million, I think, is a fair ballpark estimate, and upwards to 6, 7, depending on how your crowd counts go and how your extrapolation goes. Those are huge numbers. My wife and daughter and I were at one down Fifth Avenue in New York City, and it was easily the biggest protest I've ever been at. I don't have a huge storied protest history in New York, quite the opposite, but it was an enormous group of people. And this was replicated at scale across the country. Those, if you get up into the 5 million range, if that's the number, that's quite a bit larger than anything that happened during Trump 1. I think Women's Day March was 3.8 to 4.3 was the number I think I had in my head for that. That was obviously a massive, massive number at the time. And so we're above that. Obviously, we haven't seen the kind of sustained protests that we saw during 2020 around police killings in George Floyd, but these are still extremely large numbers for a Saturday in June. It's, I mean, also worth noting that it was really bad weather all across the country for that weekend. If we get a nice sunny weekend and people are exercised, these numbers are going to go up. I took a lot of heart in seeing just a really, really diverse group of people who were as normie as could be, right on up to the crunchy granola DSA voting, former 70s communist, basically. I mean, like, and everyone in between from an age, ideology, life experience perspective. That was really fun to see and to be a part of in New York.
Meanwhile, in DC, the big show was the Army Parade, which I think it's safe to say was underwhelming. This was the combination Army 250th birthday / Trump's 69th. Is that what we're up to for him?
79th.
79th. Jesus, yes, 79th birthday, where he got his army men to bring out the tanks and the various self-propelled artillery to do a parade through DC that cost estimates are in the $50 million range that relatively few people went to. It was.
Do we have a good number for, I've seen a couple different estimates. Do we know what the attendance was for that was?
I don't have a good number. I haven't seen an official U.S. government estimate, which makes me think they can't support one that's going to make Trump happy.
Yeah.
They definitely were set up for a much bigger crowd than they actually did.
They had 50 people from Loudoun County. They're to watch our troops do the most half-assed marching I have ever seen in my life. And
the
I'm
U.S.
proud
military
of them.
is bad at marching, but these guys were putting on a clinic at it. I mean, they were horrible.
Now I say that laudatory. Listen, if you want a very pretty parade, the Chinese can do that. The North Koreans can do that.
India can do that for you with camels, which is really impressive if you've ever seen those
India
ones.
can do it for you with camels. I would have said Iran. Now I have some doubts about that, given their lack of discipline. We can't do that. But if you need a Burger King planted anywhere in the world with troops within a 48-hour window, our boys can do that. And that's much more impressive.
These colors don't run, baby.
That's right.
The red and gold, but it's the arches rather than the communist flag. I will say that Saturday was miserable weather in DC. I went through 4 shirts and 2 showers on Saturday, and I was only doing a little bit of light yard work. You know, that may have held down attendance a little bit too, but it's a really good sign as we're at this point in an attempted authoritarian transition that Trump can't get people to show up for his birthday party. So earlier we talked a little bit about how in Los Angeles, the anti-riot action was primarily coming from LASD, Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, and LAPD, the LA Police Department. And I thought there was a really good discussion happening on Blue Sky this week about how the nature of this riot control tends to be local rather than coming from anywhere higher up in the vertical hierarchy. That these are not national troops that are oppressing localities. That the riot control is happening through police departments in the main. And this is really kind of a through line in the tradition of American protests that goes back most immediately to the BLM protests, but that goes back a long time before that. What does it say about where we are in terms of the protest tradition in America, in terms of freedom of assembly, that for better or for worse, that the opposition force in terms of violence against protests is coming from primarily local, occasionally state authorities?
Yeah, it's something that goes back a long way too, right? Like you said, it's you can go back to 2020, obviously. Anybody that spent time at a BLM protest in 2020 probably saw the police riot themselves at some point. And those cops were almost exclusively local in terms of the percentage nationally. It's like 98% local cops. If you want to go even further back, the move bombing in Philadelphia in 1985, that was a Philadelphia Police Department operation. That was not the FBI. That was not the National Guard, right? Different situation from a mass street protest, to be sure, but some of the worst atrocities that have been carried out against peaceful protesters in this country have come from people that are ostensibly controlled by the very politicians that represent those people and are in fact our neighbors, really, in many cases, right? And I think if we're going to get to the point where national protest is exercising any restraint against the forces of reaction at the federal level, there has to be some sort of containment of the forces of reaction at the local level. There has to be some sort of penalty for police forces escalating and attacking protesters, which we saw a number of times this week. It happened right here in Charlotte. There was a pepper spraying incident. It happened in Los Angeles as probably the best examples. There were other examples around the country, but those two were the big ones.
The Australian journalist in Los Angeles was
unbelievable.
Incredible.
Woman in, clearly not black bloc or something like that. No gas mask or anything like that. Blonde Australian woman talking in the middle of the street on a microphone, well back from the police line, at least 20 feet. Perspective can be weird on TV, but at least 20 feet, maybe more, maybe 30 or 40. And gesturing and pointing with a camera right there in line of sight to the officer that just pulls out a tear gas launcher and fires a canister directly at her and ends up hitting her. And she was okay, I think. Oh, it was a tear gas or a rubber bullet?
It was a rubber bullet.
Rubber bullet. Okay.
Took a chunk out of her leg. Yeah, I mean, the best possible face you can put on that is that the police officer was completely reckless and was trying to skip the rubber bullet past her to somebody past. But like the camera angle sure makes it look like this is a guy who is lining up a shot on a journalist.
And we can be as exercised and worked up as we want about the National Guard being deployed to LA, which is bad. It shouldn't be happening. And the same thing for the Marines, and the same thing for the grotesque rhetoric that has just been used with reckless abandon by people like the president for a long time, talking about protesters. But the real problem you're facing as a protester, the real violence you're facing, is not coming from the federal government. It's not. It is just not. And so getting worked up about the federal government is probably not the best use of your time, in my opinion. If your goal is to make sure that we have a civil society where constitutional rights to freedom of assembly are even gestured at by the people who enforce political power in the places we live.
And in theory, these are, insofar as these are local police forces, they're supposed to be under control of local democratically elected authorities, right? This is LAPD. In theory, that's under control of the mayor of Los Angeles, Karen Bass, who is a Democrat. I don't think she's covered herself in glory on this round of things particularly. There's supposed to be some levers that the local electeds can pull to rein in the police. LA is a little bit of a strange creature because a lot of the violence is coming from LASD, the county cops, rather than the city of Los Angeles cops.
LA County, though, is still overwhelmingly blue. I mean, it's not there. There are feedbacks to people that on paper should be heavily supportive of peaceful protests like we've seen. And yet.
Yeah, it is, but they have an atypical structure in terms of who controls the county police. So I believe it's direct election of the sheriff, and there's no other civilian oversight unless I've got the LA structure wrong.
No, I mean that would be how most county police departments are run, but still that county sheriff, the LA sheriff, is answerable to the political forces that ultimately are driving these protests. So where is it? There's a broader problem here where there is a breakdown in the representation aspect of representative democracy.
Right.
And we see this in Congress at the federal level too. We see this in state houses as well. But this is a particularly acute example of it, where the on the ground day-to-day experience of people is completely divorced from the political forces that they think they're participating in. And that isn't just about police. That's a broader problem with American democracy that's built up over the past probably century. It'd be hard to sort of pinpoint exactly where that started becoming an issue, but you contrast the sort of like the civic spirit of the Lincoln Douglas debates or something like that with an environment where it doesn't matter who you vote for, you're still going to get the jackboot. It's tough. It's really tough.
Well, and in some ways, the complication of organizational structures, like we're seeing in Los Angeles, helps further obfuscate that. Helps further sever the link of responsibility and the link of responsiveness between the democratic process and what you expect to see in terms of results. I don't think it's unreasonable for somebody who is dialed in enough to vote for mayor every 4 years or whatever, but who doesn't otherwise follow the polls very closely, to think, okay, well, I'd like to vote against the police doing whatever the hell they're doing here. Why can't I just do that once every 4 years when I vote for mayor? And, in LA, you might get some amount of influence over the LAPD doing that. There's an additional disconnect that we'll talk about in a second, but you're not going to get LASD accountability voting for the mayor of Los Angeles. That's not fundamentally how that works. So now you need to sit there with a complicated tick card. And, to some extent, we're about to see the same thing happen in New York with the New York mayoral election, where it takes 10 minutes to explain what's going on and what people should be voting for, how they should vote to deliver a certain effect.
I mean, the problem is people don't really pay attention to sheriff's races much. Like it's, you see a couple ads and it's, I'm Jim Bob and I've been a sheriff for 97 years and I'll keep criminals off the streets and keep you safe. And then the other candidate says the exact same thing. And people just vote on, which one is prettier or whatever. It's people don't really pay attention to law enforcement races like that unless the people in charge of the law enforcement have done something almost unfathomably bad.
Right. And even then, you sometimes see people even in jurisdictions that have had recent scandals. Sometimes you see these sheriffs running unopposed and nobody takes a whack at them because of any of the reasons you might not want to take a whack at a local sheriff electorally. Some of this is probably wrongdoing by the police in various jurisdictions. You had a few years back, one thing that helped sever the links of democratic accountability for the NYPD was you had NYPD leveraging Mayor de Blasio's daughter a few years back because they felt that the mayor was yanking their chain a little too hard. So they kidnapped his daughter. They arrested his daughter. That's outside of the normal democratic process, right? Like that's kind of the rubber hitting the road in terms of exercise of not raw political power, but raw state power that is not being directed by the intention of the people, by the voters in the way that you would hope that it would.
I think we have a word for that, right?
Well, we got a couple. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if you can do fascism super locally. Like you can definitely do tyranny super locally. You can have, this set of wolves that we invited in running things. These aren't even cults of personality, particularly. Like a lot of these guys are pretty anonymous, but they wield gigantic power through the fact that they wield the apparatus of force. I'm not a police abolitionist. I think that the police serve an important function in any society I can think of how to structure. But a thing that I've been consistently and increasingly disappointed with in America is how we no longer ask our police to do the things that I think our police ought to be doing. We do very little investigative work. Detective work is dying in this country. We're not trying to solve crimes. We're doing lots of patrols and lots of, incidental encounters because those stack up the metrics. Those are also the encounters that are most likely to result in violence against non-police. And over all of this is overlaid the fact of near ubiquitous guns in this country, which means that the police kind of have a point when they say that they're concerned for their lives because anybody might have a gun. That's not to say that the way they're approaching that problem is the best way to approach the problem, but it really is a concern that there are guns all over the place and a previously nonviolent encounter can turn lethally violent very, very quickly.
the last positive thing I'll say about this, again, I'm gonna just try and stay positive tonight for the second segment in a row here. There have been some incredible successes by, whether you credit them, the police or civil society or what have you, in reducing crime in this country that has the most significant impacts on our fellow citizens. Murders in Baltimore hit a record low all time, as far as anyone can tell, in the latest monthly data.
That's future Vice President Wes Moore right there for you, buddy.
Maryland excellence in Baltimore. And, it's I read a bit about it this afternoon. It was a topic of discussion online, and I read a bit about it. And nobody's really got a good idea for why this is happening. There's some theories, and they've had some programs, and but it's not like, oh, we did this one thing and it really made a huge difference. It's like, no, we made a concerted effort across a bunch of different programs, and we changed how some of our policing was working, and we did this and we did that. It wasn't like some easy thing, but there have been some successes. So even though the state of policing and the state of civil society in this country is not great, the nice thing about being a country of 350 million people is that something good is happening somewhere all the time. And that is one example. So I think we'll leave you with that optimistic note tonight. And we appreciate you hanging out and listening to us talk through this stuff and have fun together. And for Normal Men from Charlotte, I'm George.
From DC, I'm Proctor.
And from outer Florida, I'm Low Tax Speedrun Enjoyer.
And Go Like Hell Machine will return. Before we let you go, we have one quick plug. We here at Normal Men are extremely big fans of Pride, and I'm a big fan of Charlotte FC. So I'd love for you to join me and other Charlotte FC supporters as we raise money for Time Out Youth, a Charlotte space for LGBTQ plus youth. Our Pride Raiser works by pledging a donation tied to the number of goals Charlotte FC scores in June. We are terrible on the road and have no home games in June, so pledge big. Please visit perk.es, that's PEARK.es/Pride Raiser to pledge.